Perfect. Okay, welcome. So on the agenda for me today, just like a review of kind of where we're at, I think, and what we need to do next as far as the specification. There's definitely some work that we need to do. Some comments from Jordan. We were reviewing the support ID stuff. We were reviewing the license metadata stuff last time. And then I think once we kind of feel a little bit more comfortable with the schema, then I think it makes sense to kind of try find some examples of software that exists in the wild
Yeah.
and put it to the test. And so that's what I think the next kind of step is. And I think we're getting pretty close to that. Maybe a little,
Yeah.
yeah, getting pretty close to that. So I think the next step will be kind of like battle testing it with some wild examples.
Yeah, I think that's a
What does
great
everyone
idea.
think of
Like
that?
Bootstrap
Yeah,
was mentioned earlier, for example, and like,
yeah,
there's tons of examples of things that I don't know, like Next.js, for example, just had their CVE, and then there was some unambiguity and then clarity about their support policy. React also recently committed to security support for every past release line, which is something they'd never explicitly done in the past. Just, and that's just the JavaScript ecosystem, but like finding kind of big popular exemplars and saying, here is what happens, here is how the schema would represent that, and then making sure those stay in sync with the spec. That sounds amazing.
okay, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. I think like as far as the types of items that we want to like battle test it against, definitely want to test it against open source projects. Like just normal open source, then commercial open source as well, like potentially like Bootstrap, kind of like an entity behind it. Um, and I would love to get more like operating system level or more, let's say like commercial software from some of the big vendors, like Red Hat or like Microsoft or things like that. At least, that's how I'm thinking about it. Um,
Cool.
cool. Okay, so back to the specification. I just wanted to review Jordan had some comments, so I wanted to review kind of the comments and these different items in the specification.
Cool.
So the first one, just open this.
Yeah, the word, it was just the word guaranteed. Like
Yeah.
that's a contractual thing, and I don't think we want to capture that, at
Hmm.
least at this stage.
Yeah.
Well, it
Um,
is unfortunately a thing that the FDA actually does require today. So I do think we need to support it. So when
Mm.
medical devices go for FDA approval, they
Mhm.
actually do have to provide a bunch of end of dates. It is a hard requirement. And right now they are doing it in like Excel or like a PDF or whatever. There is no requirement on machine readability of that. However, that requirement is likely coming. And I posted a link to Christopher
Yeah, I'm
Gates.
reading
He's
that.
been involved. Yeah, he's been involved with the whole SBOM thing since the very beginning back in 2018, I think, with NTIA. He's written a few books on medical device security as well. Um, he has a description of that guaranteed support, and yeah, this does not apply to open source at all. Now, it
So
could apply to commercial open source.
yeah.
mm,
So it seems to me then what you're describing is an potentially industry specific property of end of support, meaning like instead of having it be its own event, it would be like an attribute of this, like adding a property here that says guaranteed true or guaranteed, or guarantee colon FDA dash whatever, I don't know, some standard pointer to that describes the contract. Um, I do agree that it's important. We definitely need to make sure that eventually we can control cover this use case. But like that's we do want to also, we don't want like a massive explosion of top level event types. And if the only people that would use end of guaranteed support, like if what it means is whatever the FDA requires for that guarantee, then that's like a
Mhm.
really niche use case for a top level thing.
I would agree with that. I think there's some base level of events, and potentially there's like domain specific events. Maybe it's for hardware or in the medical space or something that
Mhm.
could be used to enrich the events, I think.
Yeah,
So I
like
would
it's
agree
and
with
it's
that.
I think it's fine. Like like in a future state, I think it's fine if all the information you need isn't in this data, as long as it has enough information to unambiguously point to it. So like in the same way as like a Perl, you still have to know what type the Perl is. You have to encode that information somewhere else, but the Perl gives you enough to come to unambiguously combine it with that knowledge and come up with the rest of the information you need. And so similarly here, like what we'll want is some way that says this is the guarantee, or this is the legal standard that it meets or whatever. And we'll want to do that in a way that combined with some other knowledge unambiguously answers your questions.
Yeah. The assured services word here confuses me actually. It's I don't know what that implies actually. And I
So
don't yeah.
yeah, this is like, this could be contractual. It could be as part of the procurement language or whatever, where this is the level of support that a vendor is saying that they're going to give to you. Um, However, you can pay us for additional support if you so choose,
Mm,
which is why that end of limited support is also a thing, right? Because if you
mhm.
pay enough money, sure, we'll support this thing for an additional 5 years.
But that, like, some companies might offer 5 years, some might offer 2, some might offer 10, right? Like these are all variations. And so like, and also when you're talking about if it's a legally required contract, are you talking about US law from 2025 or 2026, or EU law from 2025 or 2026, like, or whatever, it happens to become relevant. Like,
I don't think that really matters so much.
no, I
No,
mean,
I
like
don't
it's
think
with
so.
licenses, you have to, you change the license identifier whenever there's any change, so that you unambiguously can point to a separate thing that talks about the legal requirements, right? It's like
R-
a JSON schema
Right,
URL,
but
or
yeah, we're not representing contracts and stuff, or
Mhm.
procurement language in the spec. So I don't think it's something we need to capture.
But
But
that's what the word guaranteed or limited is doing.
it is.
It's enshrining some level of category to something that, and in order to do that, we have to come up with some definition, or a de facto one will be created. And if that's not extensible to all the future use cases, then that's done more harm than good.
Okay, maybe we should get Chris in this group, would be my
Okay.
recommendation.
Yeah.
He can probably provide a
Like
little bit
having a
more
like
context.
more info URL, and then that URL talks about guarantee and limited or whatever. That seems fine. Like I'm great with an escape hatch. It's
Yeah,
just I don't want to like design ourselves into a corner, like by assuming that this is the only way that, you know what I mean? Like there was a time when security support and uh bug fix support were not considered separate, right? And then
right.
then they became separate. And so any system that had encoded that support is binary would have had a lot of disruption. And so similarly speaking, if we say there are 3 or 4 categories and then there ends up being a fifth, then like then we didn't design it properly.
Hmm, hmm.
I think this so this is the article by Christopher Gates. I think
Mhm.
this one will actually be really interesting as well to kind of battle test things.
Yeah.
And we could even kind of like battle test it and then show it to Chris and be like, does this cover all the use cases for medical devices? Like, does it have all the information you need? So
Right.
I
But
think that
also, I
would
think we
be,
decided a couple meetings ago that we were
yeah,
going to focus on open source for the first version.
yes,
So it's also
yes.
something that
That
we
is
could,
a huge mistake, I think.
you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Why?
Well, because the procurement language and the regulations are all around commercial vendors. Now, commercial vendors obviously use open source,
Mhm.
but it's the commercial vendors that are having the regulatory pressure to provide this information.
But if the open source community doesn't provide it, then just like SBOMs, it's like going to put all of the onus and effort. Like if we do this so it works with open source, people will adopt it because there isn't currently a way to programmatically declare your support policy for open source. And that was the problem with SBOMs was that they made it was like that has been part of the struggle I've seen with SBOMs is that it was designed enterprise first and government first. And so there's no reason for or incentive for open source to adopt it. And it's, hard to explain the perceived value. But I think there is a lot of value here for open source that would then like be enhanced by using it in enterprise use cases, right? And like to be clear, I think we shouldn't design it so it can only be used for open source. We should design it so it can eventually be used for all of the things you've mentioned. But I like as a form of like scope management, that was my thinking there.
The as long as we well the SBOM use case is interesting. Open source has adopted SBOM much more
Mm,
so than enterprise. I can go on Maven Central, for
okay.
example, and there's like 100,000 CycloneDX SBOMs, right? Like
Okay.
160,000, something like that.
There's
They're all
probably
over the place.
NPM is many times larger than Maven, and there's probably less than 100,000 SBOMs on NPM. So maybe it just depends on the ecosystem. But
Yeah, could be. And I highly doubt that there's 100,000 organizations that have actually produced and shared SBOMs. Now,
that's fair.
the enterprise use case is interesting because talking to a lot of enterprises and working for one, I
Mhm.
can tell you that um, the information is available, but in many cases, the legal teams simply do not want to share, and it has nothing to do with um, you know, um, thinking that it's going to release intellectual property or anything like that. They have some really interesting concerns that CISA really hasn't confronted yet, including the ability for some organizations to provide different SBOMs for the same product, mind you, different SBOMs to different types of customers based on the level of perceived trust of that
Mm.
particular customer. So there's a lot of nuance that the legal teams have injected into SBOM that I think the U.S. government did not preempt. I think they preempted just a flat out no. They didn't necessarily preempt the nuance and the variance. I talked to one vendor that based on the number of permutations that they would have, they would literally have hundreds of SBOMs for a single product if their legal
Right.
team actually got their way.
Well,
So
so I guess, do you still believe it would be a mistake if in December we had the standard approved for that was designed for open source, but with very clear messaging and design space, and for that we're going to handle medical devices, we're going to handle hardware, like we should like that we list all of the things we're definitely going to handle, and that we include and we include versioning in it right out the gate, so that it's fine if we need to make breaking changes. That's what the version field is for. Um, because I think that I would rather see us make like there's a GA every 6 months, so I would rather see us make small changes and publish a new version every 6 months than see us spend years spinning our wheels.
I don't think it'll take years.
Okay.
You know, in terms of software, right?
Hmm.
You have Perl and CPE.
Hmm.
That's it. I mean, you can optionally support SWID if you want, but you also have the Perl SWID type, so you
Hmm.
can do that. That covers basically pretty much all software, right? And
For
then
that angle, but I meant we're talking about like the guaranteed and the limited and stuff like that. Like,
that. I think you kind of brought in an interesting point where you had like an attribute, additional
mhm,
property, for example, on that end of life. That might be interesting.
okay,
So instead of like overloading, like you said, overloading it with a bunch of end of supports, like
right.
different types of end of supports, you kind of further break it down by an enum of some kind. I think
Right.
that would be fine,
And
actually.
those would be non-breaking additions that we could fast follow every 6 months into the standard as
Sure.
neat use cases pop up, right? And
Yeah, I
so
think
that's sort
that's
of what I'm
fine.
envisioning is not that would be our path for supporting anything else is like we could add a new top level thing if we need to, or we can add attributes to the existing, hopefully generic top level things to cover
Right.
these cases. And if we find that we've made a poor design decision because we now have more information, then we could do a breaking change and improve the design, and
Yeah,
that's
that's
okay.
fine. I think that approach is fine. I would like to
Okay.
get Chris's. I
Of
would
course.
like to run this by Chris though, just to kind of make sure that this is going to meet, because he doesn't work for just like a medical device maker,
Uh-huh.
right? He actually consults with a ton of medical device makers. So
Yeah,
he has
that's
a
great.
lot of context on this.
Yeah, so I also don't mean my stance is not that we should reject input from non-open source use cases. It's that we should not we should eagerly defer non-open source questions, and anytime that input comes in and we can incorporate it, we should.
Got
So
it.
if we can
Okay.
get the first version of the standard to account for medical devices, even better. But I
Got it.
don't want
Okay.
us to delay that on account of non-open source things. That's where I'm coming from. And obviously we all have to agree on all this stuff. That's like my thought process around it.
Okay. So when you said your focus was open source, you're specifically meaning the life cycle events, or
Yes.
the milestone events,
Yes,
not the
correct. Is that
entirety of, okay,
I want
got it.
in December to have an approved thing that can describe the vast majority, if not the entirety, of open source lifecycle events. If it does more than that, awesome. But I
Got
don't
it.
want to delay that for the service of other things. I want to do fast follows instead if that comes up.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. I my input is I think I would agree with that. We're trying to I think we're trying to work towards basically an MVP here for for a limited use case
Hmm.
with the you know in the back of our minds that we're going to be supporting these medical devices or different types
Yeah.
of software eventually. But version one, we have a
Yeah.
really solid use case for one specific domain that we
Right.
really know about and it's solid. And
Yeah.
then
And we
add
should
on.
be very clear in our messaging. Like the goal is to eventually support everything.
Yeah.
Like everything that has a life cycle, we should eventually be able to describe. But that's going to be a very iterative process over time, and you know, we want to be able to get something done and useful for non-zero people, and to gradually increase that percentage.
So are
Like,
you
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, are you envisaging that if you get out the MVP in December and
Mhm.
then ready with additional stuff 6 months later, it would actually be not that hard to make it a 1.1 because it's basically extended like functionality without breaking changes rather than a
Ex
2.0.
Exactly right. And we have numbers go on forever, so exactly that. And I think in Semver, so we don't necessarily have to use that, but like I definitely think we need at least a way to say this is a breaking and this is a non-breaking change. And and beyond that, like it's pedant, it's pedantry, but like but exactly right. I think we should be able to um design things in a way to prefer non-breaking additions because that drastically increases the adoptability of the addition. And when we need to make a breaking change, we should not be afraid of doing so, as long as we have as long as we keep in our minds the migration path for the ecosystem.
Right. And if we've got an MVP which is really aimed at kind of being useful on day one for open source,
Mhm.
the intention is still to have something which any commercial vendor could actually make use of from day one. So, as
Correct.
an example, developing their commercial software, pulling in open source components, and suddenly the quality of the commercial product is better because they've actually got much more accurate or useful information on the open source components that they're consuming.
Precisely right. And it's my hope that for example, like of the 5 of us and who perhaps the rest of the TC, but like, for example, my employer provides commercial support for open source software. So that is clearly something that I want to represent in this standard. You know, even if more information in the future will be required to do so properly, like that's clearly, so my hope would be that anyone who sees what we come out with in December and thinks that's not enough to cover my use case, I would hope that they say, but I trust that they're going to keep building on it. And so if I tell them what I need, they'll incorporate it. And that I'm hoping that the corporate makeup of all of us delegates and participants like speaks to that. These are the use cases that we want to eventually solve for, and we're working there iteratively.
Yeah, and specifically also when we're doing this battle testing, I think we should not that we're going to necessarily support it out of the gate, but like we should test against types of software that we will support in the future, just to make sure there's no egregious errors, like we're not going to be able to support this in the future based on what we have now.
Yeah, 100%. It's totally fine
Yeah.
if we have exemplars, use cases, whatever we want to call this book of things. We should
Yeah.
have some that we don't support yet, and we should be able to indicate this is not currently supported, but is intended to be.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. The book of test cases.
Yeah.
So, and then, yeah, open source, I think, has just kind of the greatest breadth and the highest impact, and is probably the most easy to nail down as far as the standard, versus kind of trying to go into this web of complexity for
Right.
commercial software that is different, usually, you know, quite different from vendor to vendor.
Totally. And it's although it's not the only path to industry adoption,
Yeah.
open source adoption often portends industry adoption for things, and it is a very successful path, and I think it's one we should take.
Yeah. I would agree there.
Now, in terms of finding sort of examples, is this where you might want to actually like reach out to people like Sonotype? Because
Absolutely.
you would want them to be an early adopter, but Sonotype is actually interesting because if you had end of life for events for the Nexus Repository Manager, they basically just changed their licensing such that from a particular version, you're not going to be able to upgrade anymore unless you've actually started to pay for their new kind of licensing model.
Mhm.
So you can use it for a certain limit of projects or requests per day, but once you actually exceed that threshold, you now got to start paying for it. So the point being is that you need to have an event, and this is what might not get into the MVP, where you're saying you can't upgrade further unless you actually just change the way that you actually unless you start paying.
Right. I mean, I think that license change events need to be part of the MVP. Anything more granular than that about what the license change event means may not need to be, but that's the sort of, you can look up the license and figure that out yourself. But like even in open source, licenses do change, and a change from MIT to GPL or something, that is a really important change that people need to know about, and definitely affects like their support, the support status of software. Because if you can't upgrade to a version and the license, the old license that you need is not supported, then your software is unsupported, and you need to know that.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important.
So that goes back then to the value of perhaps having Nexus Repository Manager as a use case, because
Yes.
Sonatype would basically then look at the way that their own software is handled in the MVP and declare happiness, and we know we're good to go.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a correct understanding to me. Yeah.
As far as the test cases, I was thinking of kind of selecting or kind of gathering test cases from everyone, but a few from each of these type of like areas, right? Like open source, maybe we're talking about frameworks or databases or programming languages, right? So end of life date has a whole website full of different examples that we could pull from.
Right.
So,
Well, one use case that I always like is Jackson Databind, which basically moved from a Codehouse project, you know, with Jackson Mapper-ASL and Jackson Mapper something else. Basically, the difference between them was, I think, licensing, to Jackson Databind. Now, if you still got Jackson Mapper ASL in your project, which I'm ashamed to say that I do have a couple of projects with it floating around, you can also have Jackson Databind sitting side by side. So it's actually the CLE which would actually identify that there's been a change of name, and effectively you've got duplicate components floating around.
that's a good one actually. Maybe could you post that in the Slack channel? If you have any more information on the Jackson data
yes,
bind stuff.
believe me, I've been actually trying to persuade some of our Scrum Masters and product owners and stuff to upgrade it for years. So it'll take me a few minutes to dig it out, but after I've done, I'll be able to post some something with good examples.
Okay.
As an example, the developer of Jackson Databind, who said, we introduced certain functionality in a specific version of Jackson Mapper, where before this version, you can pretty much believe that most of the vulnerabilities that are declared for Jackson Databind don't apply. But you've got that range of versions after the introduction of that functionality, where any CVE that affects Jackson Databind, you should believe also affects Jackson Mapper. Now, if you go into OSS Index, I think, and search for Jackson Mapper ASL, I think you might be able to actually find a couple of examples of that, because I brought it to their attention years ago. But I'm sure that if a new vulnerability came along tomorrow, nobody would actually register it against Jackson Mapper.
No, it sounds like a good use case. If you could kind of like, I guess, summarize it and post any like links or anything in the Slack channel, that would be really useful. We could add it to the book of test cases.
Yeah. And another one, what about when say Commons Collections changes from version 3 to 4, where you can have both in the project, but if you've got version 3 in your project and you know that you're on the latest version, but actually you should really be looking at doing a migration if possible. So it's similar to the Jackson one, but not quite the same.
I'd have to take a look at that, but we'll kind of crowdsource some test cases here, I think. So keep them in mind. But as far as the agenda here, so for the end of guaranteed support, I guess we will kind of review that a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should hope
yeah.
for Chris's feedback, but pending that, I think we should
Yeah.
remove the end of guaranteed support and end of limited support top level items, and then like file an issue so we track maybe adding an attribute for it and seeing what Chris says.
Okay.
And then the second item on here was end of support and end of life. What's the difference between those?
Let's see the so end of support, all support, including security patches and bug fixes. Let's see. Oh, we do have end of life as well.
Yeah, like that. Those to
Yeah.
me are the same. Like they're slightly different wording, but I can't figure out a concrete difference between them.
No, the end of life means you can't even pay that manufacturer for extended support if you wanted to.
Oh, I see.
But that's a decision they could change over time. So that
Not
like
in some cases, right? Maybe they don't even have the staff anymore to do it. You know, think in 50 years when there's no more
sure.
people that support COBOL, or if you
Yeah,
don't.
but I mean, but let's say someone new takes an interest and learns COBOL, and then like suddenly they can do it again. So it's like I mean, even though in practice it's going to be a permanent state, it's not necessarily a permanent state.
Is this for is this sort of like a version range, or is this for an entire, let's say, a component or a
Yeah,
product?
it could be for a range, it could be for an entire product family.
Okay.
Right. Like you know, in some cases, you know, talent might leave and you don't have anyone. You in some cases the compilers no longer work because you'd have to get 40-year-old computers to be able to even compile it. Yeah.
So
here's one
Should
example.
this also be an attribute of one of the events instead of having two separate events?
I was thinking that I was wondering if basically end of support covers end of life already. End of support along with basically support levels.
Yeah. Because one of the support levels of end of support would be like go to hell,
So
you know, or whatever the equivalent is.
I think we need to be careful on I think there's going to be a fine line between coming up with those top level categories that we want and then having like an enumeration of more finer grained things versus if you have like multiple, for example, end of supports, and then you have to constantly go into each one to figure out, well, is this a kind of end of support that I'm looking for? No, go to the next one type of
But
thing.
you have to do that anyway because of the version range and the date stamps.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, I see that there's like a slight potential optimization that like you could just start looking at the types, and if you know that you don't have any of a certain type, then you don't have to look. But like, I think in most cases, you're always going to have to look over the entire list, or you know, the entire list since the last time you looked.
So I see like if stepping back from like a PLM perspective, right? Product lifecycle management. End of life means it's done, right?
Yeah.
Period. Support
but
is
there
one
could
of
be
those.
there could be third-party commercial support though.
That's fine, but from a
Okay.
manufacturer's assertion, right? This is
Okay, yeah.
this is it. Support is one of many things within the PLM.
Okay. Yeah,
That's
I mean,
how I
if
see it anyway.
this isn't like a strong, if they need to be two top level things, that's fine. It's just my hope is that or my expectation is that someone should be able to look at just a list of types and should be able to somewhat intuitively understand what they mean and not think that two are equivalent. And I don't think these two pass that test right now. Salve, I see your hand is up. Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
So I've got one example, a real world example of end of life. We used to work for a company called Ipswich, which makes WSFTP client, WhatsApp Gold, which is network monitoring. But one of its products was something called WSPing, which was a really useful little sort of client, which would let you do all sorts of things, like basically sort of ping devices on the network, get really good information back. But they lost the source code. They genuinely lost the source code. Now, what happens if this had happened today, and they were trying to sell in Europe, we're governed by the CRA and NIS2 and stuff, and they're forced to declare an end of life, even though the regulations would say that they're still supposed to support it, but it genuinely did happen. And the unfortunate thing was that after they did discontinue WSPing, the WhatsApp Gold product incorporated WSPing as a client within the WhatsApp Gold product, but they were unable to actually fix anything in that because, as I said, they'd lost the code. Now, in that particular case, I would say that was something of such monetary value to them, because 20 years later, the WhatsApp Gold is still a product. I'm sure it doesn't include WSPing, but that's, I'm sure, where a company would actually say, if we're going to support this, we're going to have to totally rip out that functionality and rebuild it from scratch. Correct? Is that even a kind of a valid use case at all, of a kind of why something can actually be declared end of life?
Yeah, I've actually heard that use case before.
Yeah, well, I was actually at the coalface.
If would it help to clarify this by just defining that end of life talks about the product and end of support talks about as release? Version 4 is end of support in after 4 years, but there's still a version 5 that you can upgrade to.
Yeah,
but, if there's no product anymore, then
that's how I was. That's what I thought it was. I thought end of life was a product, but Steve mentioned that it could be per version range as well.
Well, we have to okay. Obviously, we have to clarify this. So and just pick an interpretation and go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, like if it turned, this may in fact just be a bike shedding. Like, how do we spell the name of these two events, right? Because I just looked at them and was confused. Maybe we need them as is, and that's fine. Yeah, we should clarify it and then hopefully derive better names from the clarification.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion either way right now, just looking at them, but I do agree with Jordan in that they are too confusing right now. And it's hard to, if I was looking at the standard, what do I pick? Do I pick end of support or do I pick end of life? It's not as clear as it could be, I think.
Right.
So I will agree with that.
But does any of those two have a describing context? Like I haven't looked at the specification yet. So if one part of the specification talks about releases and the other part talks about the product, and then you won't find release information in the product section.
I mean, we can do that, but I think we also want to make it as intuitive and discoverable as possible from the other end, where they're looking at the data, and the name of the actual string in the type field is, I think, pretty important for that to some degree. It needs to be something Googleable and or something intuitive.
Chris is going to join us, by the way.
Oh, cool. That's great. Well, so real quick, because we have only 12 more minutes.
Yeah.
So end of marketing. Why does anyone care? Who cares if something's marketed or not? That's like,
it's a leading indicator.
So if I'm not advertising it, okay.
Yeah, it's a leading indicator that the support is likely soon to expire or soon to be announced.
But also, let me see here. End of marketing. It seems like this is such. If you're doing it at the version level, it seems like something that would be like, I guess, I don't know. What's the use case? What's the number of companies
comes out?
What's the number of companies that are
that
using or like know of their marketing cadence around versions of products, I suppose. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Well, but I mean, also like, if I have a car, my 2025 model car is out. My 2024 car might not be advertised anymore, but it's still going to be supported for a decade or whatever. Like, so it's not actually telling you much. And if it's open source software, if V5 comes out, V4 is still supported. But of course, I'm not going to advertise V4 anymore. Like I hear it's a leading indicator, but like, why would anyone? Like, I feel like there's not a lot of use cases where someone's going to volunteer that information and not already know the end date. Like, why would they stop marketing if they don't already know when they're going to stop supporting it? Unless the end of marketing doesn't mean they're going to stop supporting it, in which case, what's the value?
I can tell you from an M&A use case
Uh-huh.
that this actually happens all the time. When a company is acquired, you halt the marketing of that new thing. But while you are acquiring and figuring out, because again, you don't have access to the intellectual property until the deal closes typically, right? And once you actually iron out all the details and figure out exactly how long this is going to take to, say, for example, re-platform into your existing, product or something, you don't know what your support is going to look like initially. This happens
But
all the time.
why would you put out an end of marketing event during when a deal isn't closed?
You put it out the moment the deal closes, but you still don't know when when your support is going to take place. How long you're going to support this thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay.
This could be clarified in the spec, by the way. That sounds like a useful example.
And maybe that's something that we do, right? I mean, in addition, I think the spec needs to, and I agree with Jordan's statement earlier that some of these definitions that we have need some work so that it's a little bit more obvious. But in addition to the specification itself, I think it probably warrants a FAQ or best practice or something along those lines.
Yeah. Another lens I think we should be using to think about this stuff is how when somebody asks, why is that a top level type instead of an attribute on another one? Or why isn't that a top level type instead of an attribute on another one? And so on. Like people, we should have those answers should either be really easy to derive by looking at the names of things, or if not, then we need an explanation for it. And so it's fine if like these questions that I have that are on the agenda, it's fine if the answers are, it needs to be this way because X. We just need to then document X and or name the types better, right? And that's fine. Like for the end of marketing, it's not like I'm opposed to the idea of that event existing. I just couldn't conceive of why it would make a difference. That's a fine explanation, even though I think it is pretty niche. Let's document it somewhere.
And would you have possible end of marketing and then marketing restarts? It's different marketing.
No, I've never seen that. In the case of M&As, right, you basically stop marketing, and then as you figure out all the IP and how long it's actually going to take for you to re-platform everything over, you need to support that thing and existing customers for so long, and you're not going to know that until it takes you.
What about Adobe and Figma?
Well, that deal never closed.
It did close. They announced it, and then they terminated it later because of for legal reasons, because of regulatory concerns. And so maybe Figma could have stopped their marketing and then restarted it when they no longer were going to be acquired.
Which means that the deal, the announcement was made.
Oh, I see.
But that was not a closed deal, right? It was subject
closed
to regulatory approval.
legally signed. Okay, got it. All right.
Yeah,
I missed that nuance. Thank you.
So we only have 5 minutes left here, I think.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for showing up. Why don't we can defer all the other questions. I want to make.
Sorry, I was getting lunch, or I'd be here sooner, but I said
yeah, no worries.
Saw something from Steve and went, red alert, 911.
You're the expert, man.
So No,
So this was
I'm
the
not an expert. I've just been through it a lot. So
I think this was triggered by the end of guaranteed versus and limited support, and sort of my concern about enshrining too much detail about legal contracts and regulatory requirements into a spec when those definitely will change over time. And then separately, the question of like, should these be top level events or just attributes on, you know, a more generic end of support? Again, maybe the attribute value isn't a Boolean like true or false. Maybe it's like a reference to a law or an ISO standard or something. Like, what are your thoughts on all that?
So let's start with it could change any time. As for
Mhm.
medical, everything I will say here is scoped to medical device. Okay.
Sure.
In the case of medical, it hasn't changed in 30, 40 years.
Mhm.
Okay. So it's not something that really changes. We know this. Is some of it tribal knowledge? Yes. Is some of it codified like the 24 months from end of notification, end of guaranteed support regulatory? Yes, that one is. But some of the other stuff are just conventions and
Mhm.
what our customer base is expecting. So we are expecting that customer to say, if I'm going to buy this from you, I expect that I'm going to get 36 months on some limited support for this at the end of it. This gives me a chance to replace them and get something new in here and get them all out of the marketplace. If you were not to follow that, you would be shooting yourself in the foot. So
Sure.
some of these are regulatory, some of these are just conventions, but conventions with teeth. So
But I guess if the so in the context here where I have a JSON data describing an event, a life cycle event, and if I'm saying that the support for this medical device is ended, that convention that you just described, whether it's 24, 36 months, whatever, that's somewhat implicit, is it not?
it is in the medical, yes, but it may
Right.
not be for other domains.
Does it need then any explicit things in our standard at the moment to document it when it is, because it is a medical device, it's almost statutory or conventional to have some set period of time after it for the guaranteed support?
It is, but obviously you're not scoped as it's medical. So what I would put in your spec is there is an assumed X amount of time that is industry dependent. Okay. Now, is that industry being driven by contracts or the customer expectations or regulatory? Doesn't matter. It's still going to be some expectation of what that time period is. And it's measured in, multiple years on this to give them a chance to move it out. So something like that, yeah. Should you put into 36, 24 kind of months? No.
Right.
But unless you want to give an example, such as in the medical device industry, it is 24 months or 36, just to scope it so people don't think, oh, I can give them 7 days or a week and
Right.
that'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, mentioning the example and the industry specific nature of it seems great somewhere, but like I guess that's what I meant is do you foresee if no information about guaranteed or limited or any of that stuff is in the spec, just the end of support date, is anybody looking at that event not going to already know the context and the associated implicit time periods with it?
Sure. Yeah. I would
They're all
definitely
going to know
want
that?
time periods. No, they are not going to know that.
They're not.
Okay?
Oh, okay.
They're
Because
not
so it
gonna
is
know that.
variable. It's not like a hard number.
Absolutely. In fact, if you read the article that I sent you guys,
Okay.
that it was on this article came about because I was in a working group. Might have been one of yours, Steve. I forget what it was. Anyway, it was in somebody's working group, and this topic came up, and there was a whole bunch of different opinions as to what these were. And when you
Okay.
actually went back out and looked at them, then you actually got to nail them down. So those time periods, that's why I actually have those on there, is to nail that down. Here are all the phases that are expected, and here are the time periods associated with those phases for that industry. But yeah, there's a lot of nobody knew what it was. Yeah, at this point,
So
there you go.
could this be represented as a support level, like end of support of like one kind and then another end of support of another kind 36 months or 24 months later or whatever?
Right.
Would that work as well?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yes, it would. Yeah, at a minimum. So things like end of marketing are one of those vague ones that not everybody gets on board with.
Right.
But end of production is a good one.
Okay.
End of guaranteed support, and then end of support. Those are hard and fast, those three.
Okay.
Right?
But as long as we have the ability to differentiate those three events somehow, do you have any cares about how we do it?
No.
Okay. And it won't, like, it will work for medical devices is what I'm saying, as long as we can
Absolutely.
differentiate those three
Absolutely.
categories. Okay.
Yep.
That's great. That really helps.
Chris,
So
do we have
yeah,
an
go ahead.
enumeration of the end of dates that the FDA actually requires?
The only one that they actually require is from the notification of end of support, okay, to the end of guaranteed support is 24 months.
Okay.
That's the only one. The rest of these are, if you didn't offer 36 months for some limited support out there, you would be crucified by your companies, your clients. Okay, so that is expected. That being said, the FDA is certainly aware of those time periods, and they have contributed some of the standards I used to build this up from. Again, it's all in the article. IMDRF is one of them, and it's one of the bigger contributors. Who is that chaired by? A representative from the FDA. Okay, so they're very, very much involved with this and know this kind of stuff, but they're not mandating it like the 24 months is.
Got it.
Got it.
Okay.
So we talked earlier, and I know we're at time, so appreciate everyone kind of staying back a minute or two. I'll make this quick. We talked a little bit about earlier, before you joined the call, Chris, about coming up with a proposed prototype to describe the end of in a without overloading the different types of end of supports, for example. And we wanted to we wanted to run this by you to kind of get your take on, you know, is this going to work? Is that something that you'd be willing to do?
Sure, of course.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Anything for you, Steve.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
All right.
thanks, Chris, for joining on short notice.
No problem. Wish I was.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not. I was enjoying lunch. Let's put it that way. So I'm not.
I'm sorry.
I was there
Well,
earlier, but no. I got
if
back
if
from
you
lunch,
want
sat
to
down,
join,
and went, oh, Steve.
if you want to join these conversations earlier, or and you know, next time we meet what, every 2 weeks, Benji?
Every
know,
2
feel-
weeks on Thursday.
Feel free to join us.
I need another standards working group right now. Like I don't know, another hole in my head. Okay, no, I don't. As important as I think that, you know, Ecma TC54 is here, and I do, I just don't have it. Joining this new company, I am literally, when I'm done with you, I have to go write a proposal, and there's no templates. I've got to write it from scratch.
That's right.
Okay, because of this, for a client that needs it here today. Does that tell you where I'm at? I mean, normally I'm used to this being an automated thing, and it's that I've set up and I can instantly generate it. Now it's like, now I've suddenly been reduced to handcrafting lovingly these things that my business.
We will send you prototypes, Chris, and you can you can red mark them all you want.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
We'll
Awesome.
tactically use you then. Yeah.
Excellent. Tactically.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.